I look at threats as foreign, domestic, and local. We have economic that covers both. You've got European economy, you've got the Chinese weakening economy, you've obviously got our own weakening economy, you've got the state of the banks, IMF, Fed Reserve. To me, this is our number one threat, because the outcome of this economic collapse. To me, it's not a matter of if, it's definitely a matter of when. We just had a discussion, David had brought it up, California, the price of gasoline today is pushing $6 a gallon.
Wow.
It is impossible for the economy to survive with gasoline at that price.
The only caveat to that is the fact that it's a special blend only used in California. It's not something that the rest of the states use. So.
They've had interruptions in production the last couple of weeks.
Strange how there's been so many of those.
What we've seen, DHS plus other so-called service agencies buying how many rounds of ammunition?
1.4 billion.
1.6.
Oh, is that 1.6 now?
Woohoo!
Yeah.
Clearly normal usage.
Yeah.
Yeah, hollow points are good target rounds.
Hollow point.
They need
Yeah.
122 rounds per boat.
Buying it for something. Couldn't imagine what. Foreign, United Nations. You can go on forever. Small Arms Treaty. Global warming causing these wind shears.
Or the altitude. I think it's the altitude this week.
I don't care whether it's Agenda 21, Small Arms Treaty. There's no hiding the fact that the United Nations wants complete control. Many years ago in the 80s, I lived in the upper Adirondack Mountains in New York State. The UN pushed to take control of the Adirondack State Park at that time. And it is just an ongoing trend. You'll see them pull back a little bit on one thing, push over here. It's not going to stop.
I read a comment just a couple of days ago. Somebody from the UN made a statement in response to the problems that they're having in Libya with the Muslims. And he basically made the statement that freedom of speech is a right granted by the UN documents, and that he believes in it, but he thinks it should be tempered slightly when it causes provocation.
Yeah, I mean,
So
that's reasonable. You have freedom of speech when and if somebody allows you to speak.
Yeah, yeah.
I would say that the UN issues, that the initiatives that they're trying to bring forward, obviously it bleeds over into there's a domestic issue with our own politicians. They have to be complicit for any of that to take effect. So, I mean, we have the root problem. They can do whatever they want, say whatever they want, but without, I mean, as long as we have complicit politicians, regardless of party, we're willing to embrace this stuff, I mean, they can't take effect. But unfortunately, that is the root cause, in my opinion.
One of the things I've heard, though, is Agenda 21, actually a lot of cities are now onto it, a lot of it because of people like us getting the word out. And there's actually a couple of hundred cities over the past few years that have backed out of that. So that's a good thing that's coming down. More getting on board with it.
Through the UN, obviously, Europe has lived under soft socialism for years. It's preaching to the choir, but if you don't think it permeates our government, you're crazy. It has been taught today and for years in our schools. When you start at 5 years old and up, it's a lot easier to accept things because they change your world viewpoint at a young age. One that's controversial, in my opinion, to some, Islam. I will not deny there are probably peaceful Muslims.
Name two. They're called Christians.
Yeah.
But there's very few of them that you see taking a public stance against the terrorists. The reason for that is, and the documents, I don't know if any of you got to watch the Glenn Beck special, The Project, but it really well laid out documents for 10, 15 years and more
Total infiltration.
of a plan that they have for a worldwide caliphate. If you are not Muslim, you will exist under that only if you serve Islam.
Pay a tax.
It's assimilate or annihilate.
Assimilate or annihilate, that's 100% correct. Other people look at whether we have issues with our military. I prefer to think not, but it is naive to not be concerned about it. If you look anywhere, even in the area of Hickory, how many of the police departments now have armored personnel carriers? They are being supplied through Homeland Security, local police forces, and the military with weapons, paraphernalia, and vehicles
One thing,
that are not to protect and serve.
No.
one thing about those armored personnel carriers, most of them are running regular street tires. They're not even running any kind of super sidewall or anything. Most of them are just regular street tires. So there's a weak point of them. Because it surprised me, I saw one of the SBI Bearcats, and it's running just straight up radio street tires. I was surprised.
You can't afford the tires right now.
Yeah.
They haven't built a tax yet for that.
Well, and you've also got the mixing of the military.
Yeah.
Tonight, Columbia, South Carolina. South Carolina versus Georgia. Guess who's going to be assisting with crowd control? MPs. Not National Guard. Military police.
What?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. In Columbia, South they're going to be assisting with so-called crowd control at the South Carolina-Georgia game in Columbia, South Carolina.
Thin end of the wedge.
I posted on ours a link. There's a DOD directive for that. Came out in 2010. And it basically tells any military unit that if you're contacted by any civilian agency and requested, there is no alternative. They have to attend. And that you can, if you go back to our threads house, I got a copy of it I took out. You can find the DOD directive and it goes down to the last paragraph to include the use of deadly force.
A contact that I have in Michigan, when I've had some conversations with him over the past 2 months, he is Special Forces, semi-retired, was called back up recently. Part of what his training did was in Michigan, was to train National Guard units in the tactics that he used both in Iraq and Afghanistan for civilian control and for counter-urban terrorist activity. So the training is going down to the National Guards. The training is going down to local police. It's obvious when you look and start, as Don said online, you start connecting the dots. You go dot, 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 dot. It gets real apparent where we're headed, and it gets real apparent there are people worried about where we're headed and are trying to find a way to be able to control the civil disruption they expect that is coming. One of the ones my wife talks to me most about, because she doesn't really care about the UN, is local threats. Your biggest local threat is unprepared people. People within, I mean, how many days can you go without food? How many days can you go without water?
3 without water. 3 hours. No,
if-
3 days without water.
If your children are hungry, what are you going to do to try to feed them? There was an old clip, I think, that I got sent. It's a Twilight Zone
The shelter.
movie, The Shelter. If you haven't seen it, go back, look it up, and watch it. It's perfect on what happens to a man's neighbors when they're without and you have.
And that was civilized.
The world's going to come apart.
And when you look, and in this state, everybody needs to go download a copy of that new Emergency Management Act. Because that act spells out crimes for failure to evacuate as directed.
Really.
Now, I'll just have to go to jail because when the wife goes, gets the card and leaves with everybody else, I'm going to the attic. Otherwise, the guy across the street will be in my house, you know, on a collection tour. But they actually, if you read that very closely, and remember, words are important. That act, it says right up there in the specification, this does not deter the governor's right to declare martial law. Nowhere that I ever saw in the Constitution of North Carolina did she have one. But I also found she's got war powers.
Excellent.
States aren't allowed to have wars.
Except Texas. Texas got it in their constitution.
They can go to war.
Yeah.
Well, they
It
added
was
this
part of
in.
their signing on to it.
They added in there that they can go, that she has, and you got to read the documents. You know, just flip, the flip both versions doesn't work. You have to read because you'll find also in that act they modified chapter 14, which is the arms code, 17 times. They didn't need to do that just to say that they couldn't take our guns in case of emergency. That was in another part. And I haven't pulled up 14 yet and had a chance to edit it. You got to read what they're passing. These same people that you're electing and slapping on the back and giving them $50 to their thing are voting for these laws. And they're proud of it because they didn't read the thing either.
And the other thing is, if this particular emergency powers bill didn't come from a template, it will be the template for other states to use.
Because it didn't get a lot of pushback.
Exactly.
You know, Ray endorsed it.
Yeah, because it's a pro-gun bill.
Yeah, pro-gun.
Solutions. There aren't any.
No, there are, what we're doing now, that's one of them.
Survival is possible.
Well, the other
If
one
you
is,
think we can vote our way out, take your pick.
the other one is what I all the time. And you got to, when I turn on my computer, first place it goes is to executive actions. See what, anything that he's done. Look at what laws that nobody told me were going to go through Congress or are up for him to sign. Which ones he vetoed, and they got one of those pages for the governor of every state. And if you don't go there first, you have no idea what they've done because by the time it gets down to your city, it's too late.
I mean, the best thing, and it's preaching to the choir here, is to get prepared. Prepare yourself, prepare your family, network. Hopefully you've got a tribe, a network, a group, communication between other groups. Don's right. This is part of the survival, long-term solution. I have come to the conclusion over the last year and a half or so that the only absolute solution we're going to have is secession. Now, people say, nobody's ever going to vote that in, and I'm going to say, yeah, you're right. But
Well, even then, you're looking at probably bloodshed.
my theory where I've come to is if it's going to collapse, you're going to be forced into secession. You're going to have to localize, whether it's on a partial of the state basis, and regroup, and that's the time to rebuild. And I know I've been called a lunatic for even mentioning secession. I don't think we're going to vote it in. Would I like to? Yeah.
It'll happen by default.
But you're right. In a collapse, if you don't think about it, prepare for it, understand the concept and how it can be used to rebuild, we'll be much farther ahead if we've got that one step behind us when the poop hits the fan.
And the step begins in between the ears.
Correct.
Just admitting it as a possibility. And the line I use with people is, how well can you swim rope to a dead guy? What would you do? You'd cut that dead guy loose. And that's ultimately what local secession is going to be. Because my guess is just it's going to be much more local than people think. It's going to be neighborhood. Maybe if you're lucky in rural areas, county level. It's interesting what Raleigh or Atlanta has to say, but here, this is what we're doing.
I believe that Wyoming recently passed an amendment to their constitution that allowed them to establish their own currency and treasury in the event they had to succeed.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Well, and Arizona has on their ballot this year Proposition 120. What it roughly states is the air, the land, the minerals, the water, anything within the boundaries of the state of Arizona are Arizona's and Arizona's only. They're declaring total sovereignty. If it passes, there's going to be a pushback because it will no longer be, the Grand Canyon will no longer be a national park. At best, it'll be the state park of Arizona. They're pushing the envelope, and you don't hear it on the news.
Article 120?
I believe it's, Proposition or Article 120.
Yeah, let's get that out so we